Remember, I see everything.
Really? See everything? You, Mr. Vector / Nova? You see everything? Wasn't it you that said you didn't see Alita transforming Chiren back to a caring person? That you didn't see that coming? Well, huh? Oh, sorry. Yeah. So what's up, people, and welcome to another Alita Battle Angel / GUNNM video. And for this week, I wanted to talk about Vector. Yeah, I wasn't really thinking about doing a Vector video, considering the fact that he, dies in the very first movie. But if you followed my video with regards to the Alita Battle Angel novelization, I mentioned that one of the biggest disappointments I had in the character portrayal within the Alita Battle Angel Cinematic Universe was Vector. And this is mainly because the corresponding Vector that came out in the Battle Angel Alita comic verse was a very interesting, multifaceted, complex character. Yes, he was an antagonist, and yes, he did a lot of unethical things. But as a reader, I tended to like Vector because of the fact that he had a complexity that made him go beyond the usual, ooh, I'm an evil bad guy sort of person. And because of that, it made the story a lot more interesting to read. And of course, for any of the people who've read the Battle Angel Alita comic series knows that Vector doesn't die in the first few chapters of the comic, and in fact continues to come out throughout, the original series as well as Last Order. And as the readers continued down the comic storyline, they got to see a lot more complex side of Vector. And because of that, we got to see something beyond just what you might call a stereotypical bad guy. In fact, in the later chapters, he goes out of his way to help other people, such as Radio Chaos, as well as even Dyson Ido. And so, if you only saw the Vector from the movie, you may ask yourself, why would somebody that evil be willing to help somebody like Dyson Ido? However, if you read the comic and understood the complexities of Vector, that all made sense. And so what I wanted to do here was discuss what Vector was like in the comic, and because of that, why I am so disappointed in the representation of Vector from the movie and especially from the novel. Now, before I start, actually it's already 4 minutes into the video, but before I start, I do want to give a slight spoiler alert. There isn't going to be that much of a spoiler because, Vector is already dead. Or at least we think he's dead in the cinematic universe. And so whatever happens in the comic verse will probably not be reflected in the movie series. And so whatever I talk about may not spoil anybody who's only seen the movie. However, if you do want to read the comic later and want to see what Vector is like, fresh, then I would suggest that you do not watch this video. But in any case, I will only be, going over the future Vectors from the comic with the expectation that Vector is no longer going to be coming out in the movie series. So that is my spoiler alert for this video, and as always, please watch at your discretion. Okay, so Vector. Yeah, so no matter which medium you look at his character, the manga, the anime, the movie, the novels, he is an antagonist, and he is definitely ethically questionable. But unlike the movie, the anime, or the novel, he is not a completely self-centered sociopath. And because of that, he becomes a lot more interesting a character. Vector is basically a product of his upbringing in Iron City. And the best way maybe to say it is, if you were to take Hugo and keep him alive and have him not meet Alita and have to live in Iron City in the survival dog-eat-dog type of world, you will eventually get Vector. If Hugo was able to survive, he would become the future Vector. And by looking at Hugo and understanding that if he kept on becoming darker and more cynical, then you would understand what Vector becomes. And so, if you were to look at him as an antagonist, he is not the I am evil or the me sort of situation. It's a lot more complex than that. And if you were to look in the Hollywood classics, some of the antagonists that might resemble Vector one is actually a protagonist. It's Michael Corleone. Somebody who initially had a sense of ethics and still does to his own standards. But he understands that he is the head of his clan, of the Corleone family, and to keep that going, he will stop at no ends to make sure that the family stays alive. And that's what made him such an interesting character, especially in Godfather 2. Where the antagonist was actually the protagonist. The person who was somewhat evil was the main character. Another similar personality would be somebody like Viggo Tarasov, the antagonist who came out in the original John Wick. And in that film, the antagonist was another unusual, interesting character in the sense that you tended to like him. He had a sense of class and he had a sense of honor. And he would have left John Wick alone if it wasn't for his stupid son that got in the way. But once his son got in the way and John Wick declared war on the clan, then there was nothing Viggo Tarasov can do but to try to take him out, which of course he failed at. And so under similar sorts of situations, Vector in the comic is in the same light. He has a sense of honor and he has a sense of duty to his responsibilities to Iron City. As dark as they are, he understands that he is the head of the empire in the city. And as such, he will do whatever it takes to keep that empire alive. And that is what I found was interesting when he does switch between his benevolence and his oppression. In a sense that everything he does for the sake of trying to keep that empire going. So even his benevolence of helping people out is not really true benevolence, but an ulterior motive, which I'll go into a little bit later. Now, the other thing I liked about Vector was that he basically valued his upbringing. He was kind of proud of the fact that he did survive the life in Iron City to become where he was. And as such, he cherished the style that, the things that he learned when he was young. He may not have cherished the life, but he did cherish the lessons learned. And that may be one of the reasons why he likes Hugo so much, because of the fact that he sees himself in Hugo, and he could see Hugo becoming the next Vector. And I think he was quite serious when he wanted Hugo to become the head of the empire once, Vector somewhat retired. And unfortunately, due to what the situations, it didn't turn out that way. And one of the reasons had nothing to do with, of course, Alita, but Hugo's continued desire to go up to Zalem. And of course, in the comic, he didn't really try to trick Hugo for the sake of being evil. He tricked Hugo because he didn't want Hugo to be let down by knowing that he couldn't get up to Zalem. So what he did was, instead of telling him the truth, put an exorbitant amount of money that he thought Hugo would never be able to collect as the sum to be able to go up to Zalem. And of course, what he didn't realize was Hugo's determination to collect that amount of money. And so his friendship with Hugo was, I think, quite real. Of course, he kept on using and exploiting Hugo, even in the comic. But he did like Hugo and understood that maybe he will potentially be able to head the Empire in the future. But in the movie, it didn't seem to be that way. He seemed to be a lot more manipulative of a personality. However, in the movie, there was also some sort of closeness that you saw between the Vector that was portrayed by Mahershala Ali and Hugo. And as such, there was always that speculation that although he wasn't the right Vector, maybe that relationship existed until you read the novel. And that is why I am so upset at the novel. Basically, Vector did not care about Hugo. Not only did he not care about Hugo, but since the Vector in the novel was embarrassed at the fact that he grew up in Iron City rather than proud of the fact that he survived Iron City, he did not like Hugo because of the fact that Hugo kept on representing and reminding him of his past. And you realize that especially during the time when Hugo talked with Vector inside that limousine. And throughout that discussion, there was several discussions. First of all, in the Iron City, there was many times that Vector met with Hugo in the limousine. And then, of course, there's that time outside in the novelization of Alita Battle Angel, after Kinuba gets jacked. But in any case, throughout that time, there is this kind of threatening situation that Vector gives to Hugo. If you don't get your mission done, you will be dead. I will personally kill you. Sort of message was implied. Now, in the Iron City novel, although that was there was always the possibility that maybe he was exaggerating and his bite or his bark was harder than his bite. But the thing that really made you realize just how disgusted Vector was with Hugo in the Alita Battle Angel novelization was after Vector had a discussion with Hugo in the limousine and Hugo left. Vector took out a disinfectant and fumigated that entire limousine, saying, how he could not stand having that person in the car contaminating his limousine. And that would never be something that Vector in the comic would do. Vector in the comic basically honored a lot of the people who were going up similar paths to what he did because of the fact that he understood these people had the same mental kind of values that he did, the ideologies that he did, and he could relate to them. And because of that, he somewhat respected their actions and ideologies. And that's one of the reasons why I did not like the Vector in the comic. The Vector in the the Vector in the novel was basically like this one-dimensional sociopath who was all about himself, was completely evil for the sake of being evil, and stereotypical antagonist. Another thing where you can differentiate again the difference between Vector in the comic and the Vector in the movie and the novel is, again, how he made sure to keep the empire he had in Iron City alive. And nothing expressed that better than two situations. One was when he saved Radio Chaos. Again, that was a situation where he originally thought Radio Chaos was weak until he encountered the alter ego of Radio Chaos, which we all know, well, for the people who read the comic, you know who it is. But I will not give it out here due to the spoilers. The only thing I can say is, yes, the alter ego shows a significant amount of strength versus the original personality of Radio Chaos. And because Vector noticed that strength, he found that he could basically utilize and be able to find Radio Chaos's help to be useful, and so he saved Radio Chaos. So again, it's not out of benevolence, but he was kind to Radio Chaos, and he did respect Radio Chaos because he knew that he could help strengthen the city. And the Vector in the movie and the Vector especially in the novel will definitely not do what the Vector in the comic did, which was to accept advice and criticism from Radio Chaos whenever Radio Chaos thought that it was necessary. And the other example of where you noticed the difference and the complexity of Vector in the comic was after Zalem started crashing down to Iron City and kind of teetered on that edge and destroyed a good amount of Iron City. Vector went out of his way to create a shelter for the people who became homeless during that incident so that they could stay alive. And once again, this is not out of benevolence or kindness. This is out of the understanding that if the people of Iron City died, he would lose his empire. Those were the human resources that were necessary to keep his empire going. And so, under that circumstance, he understood, as much as it was a sacrifice to create a free shelter for the people, he understood that it was necessary to keep the empire going. And that would be something that the Vector, especially in the novel, who was all about me, everything about me, would not understand. If anything, he would basically turn those homeless people into slaves. And so you could see the differences in the comic and the movie, and especially the novel. And once again, the reason why I was so disappointed with the character in the novel is they did not bring out this multifaceted complexity that Vector was, which made his persona a lot more credible based upon the history of what he had to endure to grow up. Vector originally probably wasn't a evil or unethical person, but considering the fact that he had to survive in Iron City, that was one of the only options he had. Similar to Hugo, you understand that Hugo is definitely not an unethical person, but under those circumstances, as Dyson Ido said, the city will even take the most benevolent person and turn them corrupt. So Vector is a product of Iron City. And the problem that I see with this goes well beyond Battle Angel Alita versus Alita Battle Angel. And it's becomes a common trend and a common problem that I'm seeing in a lot of movies these days, unfortunately due to the comments that you see in the critics. The critics are now starting to say that the only plausible antagonist is one that is purely evil, right? They have to be dark, they have to be evil, and they have to cause a tremendous amount of unethics to make it so arguably correct to take the evil guy out, right? This person was so evil. This person was not evil enough. Those were the comments that a lot of critics had. And the problem with that is, depending upon the story, the main antagonist is not always evil, right? It doesn't have to be that way. Again, a good example of that was, Michael Corleone, who of course was a protagonist, but in his case, he was evil, but he was again a product of his past. And another example of that, which I found to be very unusual and disappointing from the critics' point of view, was when they criticized the antagonist of Captain America Winter Soldier, a Marvel Cinematic Universe movie, where, if you recall, the antagonist was a gentleman named Zemo. And I really liked his representation because of the complexity that he had in that situation. And yet he was oftentimes criticized by a lot of critics regarding that movie because he wasn't evil enough. He was not evil enough. But if you looked at the story, he was not supposed to be evil, right? I mean, the whole point of that was an act of revenge, not an act of oppression, right? He was basically a mercenary, which I'm not sure if he led an ethical life, but he wasn't particularly a criminal. But what happened during the second Avengers story, when Tony Stark created a weapon of mass destruction named Ultron and accidentally unleashed it in the world, is basically his family became a fatality victim of that action. And so he looked at Tony Stark as the main criminal and a genocidal maniac who, well, maybe not a maniac, but a criminal who basically not only killed his family, but many, many people in that town. And so his actions were completely out of revenge. And just like that one lady who confronted Tony Stark at the beginning of the movie, right after he had that speech at that college, and said her son died and made him feel guilty, that was basically the same thing that Zemo was feeling, right? I mean, the only difference was that Zemo had capabilities because he was a mercenary to exact revenge on Tony Stark, which that lady did not, so he decided to do so. And what was interesting is, of course, considering the fact that so many people died in the Avengers 2 movie, Tony Stark was the one who was still outside of jail, and Zemo was the one who was arrested and put in jail, considering the fact that Zemo killed a lot less people than Tony Stark, although it was a much more direct sort of killing. And so those sort of complexities are things that I find that's very interesting. Zemo is not supposed to be evil. But the critics couldn't understand that, so now they kept on saying he has to be more evil, he has to be dark, he has to have no sense of ethics whatsoever. But that would ruin that movie if he had been that way. And I'm not sure why critics don't understand that. And because of that, now it seems like Hollywood now has to make every antagonist just be evil, right? They can't be a complex character. They can't be a conflicting character. They just have to be evil with not a sense of morals in them, so that when the good guys defeat them, it just makes it feel so good. It's just cliche. There's so much cliche now in Hollywood, and much of it is due to the critics that demand it that way. And it's unfortunate because there is a lot of good writing, such as the one you saw in Captain America Civil War, which showed so many facets, not only of the antagonist, but also of the protagonist. And you see it also here as well. I'm not sure if that was the reason why Vector was portrayed to be evil, but what was interesting was even the critics who saw the movie said, no, he had to be even more evil. And I'm like, give me a break. Just give me a break. Okay, well, anyway, we all know about the critics for Alita Battle Angel, so I won't go further with this. But I did want to bring this point up just because of the fact that I found the vector portrayal in the novel to be just seriously wrong. And I don't think, again, it's a fault of Pat Cadigan. I don't think she was the one that decided to create Vector as evil. I think that was some of the guidance she had received to write it that way. So, I don't know. I'm not sure. But it's still disappointing anyway. Anyway, that's basically all I wanted to say with this video. And it's unfortunate that Vector died because of the fact that had they left him as a complex character, and if he stays alive, he does some very interesting things in the future, including he is the one that helps bring the Zot, the Zenith of all things, championship, televise it to Iron City. And it's very interesting because of the fact that then you get to see all the old characters who come out, which may not seem old to many other moviegoers because they are the characters he saw in the very first movie. But in the comic, the Zenith of All Things Championship happens at the latter part of Last Order. So it happens many, many, many chapters after, the original series. And so when you see a lot of the old characters coming back to see the Zot Championship, it's very, very sentimental to a lot of the readers because you get to see so many of the old characters once again. So, and Vector was the one that helped bring that situation up. Again, not due to benevolence, but due to the fact that he could get more business that way, entertainment business that way. Anyway, so that is the Vector that I wanted to introduce from the comic, and why I was so disappointed with the Vector in the movie as well as in the novel. And once again, this is a very biased opinion of one comic fan, so please take whatever I say with a grain of salt, because you may have liked the Vector that has come out in the movie or the novel. And if that's the case, more power to you. But in any case, that's about it for this video. And what did you think about Vector? If you've read the comic, what do you think about Vector in the comic versus the Vector in the movie versus the Vector in the novel? If you did not read the comic, what did you think about Vector's portrayal in the movie and possibly in the novel? If you have any comments, as always, please post it in the comment section below. And as always, thank you very much for your comments. And with that, I will continue on with more Alita Battle Angel Alita GUNNM videos in the future. I hope you join me at that time. And until then, happy comic book reading, happy movie watching, and happy novel reading. And Jaya, nice day, everyone.